It's going to be a great day. So just to remind everybody on our call now, we have representatives from our public, private, independent high schools, as well as middle schools. And so picture the topic, along with other things that might come up, is to begin to address the challenges of large gatherings and what that might look like in the fall. And Lisa, just for you to know, we do have the guidance that was issued last May available if we want to review it, just to remind people in case you want to see that. We just want to thank everybody here for everything that you've been doing to support students and their families for such a long time. But if we could just, Lisa, I'm just going to pass it over to you. This is going to be recorded, and so I know for many of you, as I'm sure you are getting many inquiries from parents and students that essentially says what's going to happen. So we will be recording in case there's pieces of this that you'll be able to use in other settings. All right, Lisa, thank you so much.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much. Sorry I was a little late. My daughter had a broken toe. That happens.
Hey, Lisa, can you turn up your volume just a little bit?
I can find it. There we go. Is this better?
Yep, perfect.
Perfecto. You see my attention deficit with all my screens open. So this is the first good news screen. This is not where we were in January, obviously, but we have officially hit our first week in the orange tier, where our adjusted case rate is less than 4. And we believe, unless anything dramatically changes this week, that we will be officially in the tier 3 or orange tier effective next Tuesday. And that we also believe that we're on the trajectory to head towards tier 4 or yellow tier by 3 weeks following. We're seeing very steep declines in positivities. All that being said, you all have experienced COVID and the ephemeral changes related to COVID-19 activity and how it changes on the day. We're seeing surges in Europe and we're seeing more cases. So this really is a race between our vaccination efforts and the social activities and gathering activities. In addition to the surges that we're seeing in Europe, we're also having almost near normal spring break activities that many Bay Area young adults are traveling to areas outside of California to bask and frolic. And that creates a reservoir for COVID-19 activity. That's exactly what COVID-19 thrives on, is those gatherings, especially in an adolescent young adult population, where they have the lowest rates of, they should appropriately have the lowest rates of vaccination, because we haven't entered into that phase of vaccinating healthy young adults. So that's just, all that being said, we're cautiously optimistic that we're headed towards yellow. There are factors like spring break and the surges that we're seeing in Europe that can have an impact and push us back into orange if we hit yellow or delay our progression to yellow. But we're pushing forward with vaccination, which is really our most important tool. And again, just a gratitude to schools for assisting with our Super Saturday events. Our success rate in vaccination is really attributed to these all hands on deck events where we can push vaccine out in a mass vaccination strategy. And so it really is because of our partnership with all of you on the phone that has gotten us contributed to the success. The other additional update is the governor has adjusted the blueprint itself. So we saw our neighboring counties like Sonoma enter the red tier for the first time, and that's because they changed the goalposts. They pushed the goalposts further out. So now you need an adjusted case rate of over 10 to have to be in the tier 1 or purple tier, and that is based on the fact that the state has prioritized vaccination of the lowest quartile of healthy places index communities in the state, which does not include any communities in Marin County. None of our zip codes are in the lowest quartile of the healthy places index. So they have vaccinated at the state level. This is really focused on the Inland Empire in the south, the Central Valley as you move up to Northern California. So really, and some of our inner city urban communities where there's deep poverty. So those are the zip codes that are included in this. And this, Dr. Willis and I support this approach in a holistic state approach toward equity and really allocating and prioritizing allocations of vaccination towards our most vulnerable communities that have been disproportionately impacted. The way this will affect us and what I earlier mentioned is that where it affects us is when we hit 4 million in these HPI communities, that we will shift the case rate that's allowed us to enter into yellow. Previously it was 1, and now it'll shift up to 2. So that is what's going to accelerate our, contribute to the acceleration of our movement into tier 4 or the yellow tier. So that's all exciting news for us, but we do anticipate, unless there's again, major surges or regression based on the return of spring breakers and other things, and other things that we are headed towards yellow. So this is, and I'll share all these slides with you so you can have them and share with your board or your teams as you like. So this is where you see we still look red, but you'll see on this that our adjusted case rate is 3.5, so less than 4. So this is our first official week in orange. You'll see that our positivity rate remains under 2%, which is already yellow tier rankings. We are concerned and following closely our health equity quartile positivity rate. These are the 10 lowest HPI census tracts in Marin County, and they look at the positivity rate in those communities, and it's creeping upward, which isn't surprising. These are communities that are typically, if you think of the Canal area, it's a younger population that was excluded from vaccination in the beginning. So we are now, as of last week, modeling the state strategy for vaccination and have doubled down our efforts in partnership with Canal Alliance and other community partners to vaccinate in the Canal. So that includes bringing our mobile teams into the Canal, expanding vaccination in partnership with Marin Community Clinics in the Canal. And we'll be using that same strategy in other of the low HPI census tracts moving forward. So vaccination is the tool that will decrease this positivity rate in our most impacted communities. So looking forward to making significant strides in that front. So this is our most updated success, where we're now approaching 35% of the total population vaccinated. We are going to be shifting. I've said this a few times. This is the wrong denominator because this is the total population. We are not vaccinating anyone 0 to 16 years old. So this will be updated. It may be updated as early as today, where we're going to be reporting on the percent of Marin County residents over the age of 16 who've been vaccinated. So we actually should be approaching 40% of Marin County residents over the age of 16 for vaccination. And you may, I think Mary Jane may have discussed earlier, we are looking forward to, with vaccine availability, the potential of an adolescent, a 16 to 18-year-old vaccination event before the end of school, and then a 16 to 18, and this again requires the use of Pfizer, and then again a 16 to 18-year-old vaccination event with Pfizer potentially right before school starts. So we can start increasing the vaccination rates in that 16 to 18 population to strive for a more near normal return to high school education in the fall by supporting vaccination in those age populations. And we finally are winning. We were lagging behind Napa for being having the highest number of doses per 100,000 residents. We are now in the lead in the state of vaccinating our residents. And again, I cannot overstate that this is truly built on the partnerships that we have, not only with the schools, but Kaiser Permanente, Marin Community Clinics, our federally qualified health centers, Marin Health, and Sutter, all working together to optimize the use of vaccination and to pull our resources together to vaccinate, as well as our private partnerships with Curative. So that's what has brought a medium-sized county into the lead in the state. It's because of the partnerships, and we're just really super proud of that. So this is where the meat of this conversation begins, and the conversation is just around what are we looking like towards graduation in the spring, summer. And just before moving into there, from a public health perspective, our greatest concern around these outdoor live events, as you've heard Dr. Willis and I say many, many times, is outdoors. COVID does not like the outdoors. So outdoors is always better than indoors. But with this particular population of young adults that will be gathering, especially the 14 plus adults, we de facto are creating a reservoir for COVID transmission anytime we allow gatherings of unvaccinated individuals, especially in that adolescent transitional age youth population, because they, not only because of the event itself, so we're bringing together a mixed group of vaccinated and non-vaccinated individuals, all with unknown behaviors. So for example, who's just returned from Mexico a week before graduation, and who's traveled from Europe where there's been higher COVID activity when they've been unvaccinated. And also remember, all these vaccinations are amazing. We are seeing breakthrough cases where it's not 100% you're vaccinated, but we already in Marin County have seen cases of individuals who've been vaccinated, then exposed to COVID and have tested positive. It's very small. It's not a common event. It's still less than 5 individuals that we know of, but this just again reinforces the importance of staying vigilant and not staying vigilant. I think that's just period. So that's why we're having this conversation now, so you can really understand the risks. So we will be creating a risk event even with outdoor graduations, and I think our goal here is to provide you information. We will align with the state. We're super excited that there'll be graduations. I think that is so critically important, such a milestone in so many of our youth lives after a really difficult year. But I think we have the shared goal of creating not only the safest possible event, what we would anticipate from these events. And if you remember, we saw it last year, it's the ancillary events, the affiliated events that happen after your event. So we know that you can do your best in creating the safest possible event and creating 6 feet distancing and doing your best to keep people separated as much as possible. And we know that's challenging because we see how youth just gather. That's who we are as humans. But then all of the, if you remember last summer, it's the graduation parties. Those became the early drivers of that summer activity where people were just, the spring fever hit a fever pitch by June and going into July, that people were gathering. And so just the nature of this life event and graduation is a natural convener. So again, we're keenly aware that the graduations themselves will also have those other activities that so the events as a reservoir, there'll be smaller events that all can be spreader events, maybe not super, ideally not super spreader events, but spreader events. So what we're anticipating is that we'll be in tier 4. The state is already, I have not seen the updated guidance. I don't think it's been released yet from the state specific to graduations and end of year events, but we're anticipating that we will be in that bottom right corner where you will need to be in a permanent venue with a live audience outdoors. You're going to have to require reservations. You're going to have assigned seating is going to be required. It's only going to be in-state visitors, so no family from out of state. And I don't anticipate that changing before the end of the school year. And then you'll be allowed to have 67% capacity, again, with all masking and other distancing orders or recommendations in effect. And then I'm going to jump one more slide, I think. So this is just the summary of the bullet points. Like I said, we can begin this of some events, and this is something for you to consider. I know you also have other events besides graduation, honor society, and other events that are part of the end of year celebrations and transitions. The key is that it has to be considered a permanent venue. So our Marin Center, your football stadium, things that are already established for outdoor venues, not just land. And it could even be our parks. Our parks would be considered a permanent venue. So for you to think outside the box, if you have some limitations on your campus on what would be a permanent venue, Gabriella Colicchio is ready. She's our Director of Cultural Services. We're vaccinating over there, but she's also ready to host modified drive-through graduations or picnic style graduations. So we want to be partners in these really important milestones in education. And I think after this year and all the blood, sweat, and tears we've all put in together to have celebratory events gives me the good kind of goosebumps, but we want to do it as safely as possible. And then just the bullet points here that were pulled out. We are anticipating a graduation specific document from the state that will just build upon this outdoor live event, but I'm not anticipating any major changes. It's probably just people like yourselves that will be kind of just screwing in some of the complexities and logistics of graduation, how it relates, how it's different than a concert event. So this is where the state was probably thinking more of concerts, and now educators across the state, as they're working with California Department of Public Health, are going to be developing guidance as it relates to the logistical realities of what graduation and end of year events look like in the school environment. And so that's it.
Okay. So let's try to start with questions. So Lisa, do you anticipate then that we will provide some guidance similar to what we did last year?
Yes.
Okay.
And also guidance to parents, because I think this is my concern is not the event itself. I think you've all demonstrated you've become experts in the mitigation strategies that need to be in place to create the safest possible environment. I think it will be also strong communications to parents and families to really reinforce what would be the current guidance for gatherings after these events. But
Okay.
yes, I see two documents. One is just us kind of giving our Marin County lens on what would be the state. We do not anticipate being more strict in any way than the state. We are lining up with the state, but just again, providing just some context and a potential one pager.
All right, and so we can send out to everybody, or Melina, can you bring on real quickly the document that came out last May? So just as a reminder, this is a document that was issued last May. Lisa, what would the timing be on something like this time?
Ideally, it would be sooner. I'm hopeful. I shouldn't be hopeful with when the state delivers things. They either deliver it before I think it's coming or much later than I want it to come. I would hope within the next, by next week, since it hasn't been delivered and it's already Thursday. By next week, the state posts the guidance, and that we would then work with the Office of Education just to review together and to issue a guidance. It depends on when in the week we receive it from the state, that we would provide an update. And again, it wouldn't be anything, you can, once you see this updated state guidance, we'll share the link. We'll make sure you have it as soon as we hear about it so you can see it. And then we'll just have a very simple bullet list that can help in your planning, so everyone's just on the same page. Sometimes the state documents get a bit wonky, like the sports document, my least favorite document.
Right. Right. Okay. The other question, I guess I just want to note, Lisa, that for everybody, there is a call scheduled for the 23rd, which is next week, on Tuesday at, I think, 11 o'clock. You'll get a notice about that because we also have the updated transportation guidance, and that affects a lot of these people as well, Lisa, in terms of, what needs to happen in terms of students on buses going to games, et cetera. So let's go ahead and we can go for questions. We'll start with what's in the chat, and then I want people to be comfortable to just ask questions. Is an athletic field rented risers stands to be considered a permanent venue?
Yes.
Will the county allow students to sit masked, distance, and together on a stage outdoors?
Yes, but I would just recommend that's your reservoir right there. So as much as we went that together, just remember that's your reservoir, because probably the majority of adults will be vaccinated at your event and the majority of those students will be unvaccinated. So what I would just recommend, if that's the strategy, and that's what I would want if I were a student. So if just considering having more staff to help in the encouragement of behavior while they're on the field, and also to consider and you guys have become experts about the ingress and egress of students onto campuses. So just taking what you've done on your school campus, how students are entering and moving, that movement to minimize that gathering potential, to consider that when you're evaluating the venue itself and how people will be lining up and supervised in those pre-formation areas. I'm having a lot of flashbacks to high school. So in those pre-formation event parts where you're getting them in line, just really consider that. I know when I spoke to Gabriella yesterday, some of the consideration was, you know, with at least if cars were an event, that the family would be able to have like picnic tables around the car, and the assigned seating becomes the car parking spot, and then people don't have to stay in their cars, they can be around their cars, but then students would be able to walk up from their space. So we want you to be creative. I really trust all of you in, you know, in adapting and to the guidance. And again, I do believe the majority of your events are not going to be will be safe events, and what we have to worry about more as the community is how do we communicate with parents and families around those ancillary events.
So Lisa, do you consider, just an overall question, do you consider this year to have more options than last year at this time?
Absolutely.
Okay, so in terms of context, if you guys could think of it sort of in that way, several questions about the distancing. So if I'm going to be out on a field, I don't know what 67% of, right, I get it when you're in an indoor space where you know what 67% is in terms of the number of people allowed. And so are you identifying the 6-foot distancing in this arena, number one, given especially that we're working right now in a 4-foot environment and maybe a 3-foot environment soon? Then number two, will vaccination rates have any play on that?
I don't think vaccination rates will have a play on it. What I'm conceiving, where like for my high school graduation, we were on so I'm all biased. I was on a field on the football field, and our chairs were probably 2 feet apart, 3 feet apart. That's where you would have to almost think of your capacity, because we had 500 people in my graduating class, so that's probably similar to some of the sizes of the high schools. So we were able to use less than half of a football field with that type of spacing. What I would anticipate is if you have a 500 person graduation, and then that event you would have conceived of 2 to 3 feet apart, you would have to now have 6 feet apart in those little plastic white chairs and pull it back. So you're going to naturally, by that distancing required between students, decrease capacity, right, of what would have normally been allowed by fire, because your other thing would be your fire code. So that's 60% of what, to me, what is allowed at that football stadium parking lot by fire, and then decrease that by 67 multiplied by 67%. So that's what I'm conceiving is based on what is naturally allowed at an event based on parking and the size of the stadium or the hall. And so, but then it might be less than 67% because of the social distancing, which is why some of the strategies about having students stay with their family might create more space, right? So you're not spreading not kids anymore, teens apart by that 6 feet. Family units can stay with family units, and then family units would need to be 6 feet apart from each other. So even conceiving of that, if you're on benches, you could seat and you have assigned seating, you're going to again have limitations. You might only be able to have 2 people, or my graduation, there were plenty of my family, too much of my family went. But you might have to limit it to 2 family members at that graduation event just because of capacity issues. And then those two, and then I also recognize that some are not the same household because they're might be separated families or divorced families, but trying to conceive, and again, thinking outside of the box, the household is a household, so you can contain that and potentially have that space. And then that 6 feet distancing between non-household members.
Okay,
so I anticipate you guys will be creative. I think this is again where your thought space and having this group, share its plannings might again help other schools just think outside of the box and apply all the mitigation strategies that we've recommended to date into this type of event.
So Lisa, there's a question, a couple here about, so can performers and speakers on stage at a podium unmask as they sing, etc.? Does this apply to outside performances for a play or a choir?
Singing, that's it. Last, I know we owe you updated guidance on singing and music. That will, I would take I haven't read the outdoor live. With each state guidance, there's an outdoor live events guidebook that we can make sure we can share with everyone to see what the state is saying around performances or speeches. Again, our intention is not to be any more strict than the state. But if you have someone, just to be aware, I was watching St. Patrick's Cathedral, the singer took off her mask when she was singing, and then she put her mask back on. So I think, again, we don't want the valedictorian can take off their mask and have a presentation, just make sure that they're 6 feet apart from anyone else and that they put the mask back on. Or if someone's singing a national anthem or the school song, it's an outdoor event. And again, just not having the vision of just a choir or a unit of a band all together is what makes me scared. An individual singing and having a proper separation, especially outdoors, is more than appropriate.
Mhm. So Lisa, I think that maybe one of the things that we might be able to do is get a group of people to come together and put up, sketch out some thoughts about what this might look like, given the variance. There's, some people here will be doing like a smaller group in a smaller space, etc. Others, as you described, gigantic. So, can we have a graduation with 800 people if we follow the rules, or is that out of the question?
Based on the current state description, I'm not seeing a limit. And again, I think what the state is reconciling is that, like, having a version of Bottle Rock happens with 1,000 people, it makes no sense to have, if you can have an appropriately guided 1,000-person graduation, that would be appropriate. I think the state is, the dissonance of allowing professional sports but not allowing graduation is reconciled. So again, as long as it's following the guidance, and as long as, again, you're just at the capacity, the recommended capacity, which is, again, we know Marin County, we don't have a Levi Stadium. That's some of the challenges that we have with capacity, is we don't have these larger events. And our Marin Center, well, the Marin Center is probably some of your schools actually have some of the largest fields and venues. So, and that, again, that's where we want to be able to partner with you and think outside the box, so we can have a healing. I mean, in so many ways, it's just a healing event for so many students and families in going into these end of year events. So, unless the state gives us a cap, which I am not anticipating.
Okay. All right. Anybody else have questions? And you can just speak, unmute and ask a question.
Mary Jane, looking ahead to senior events like a senior breakfast, would you anticipate any exchanges of food, or would it be like a grab and go, eggs, waffles, pancakes kind of outdoor event?
Will there be syrup?
Oh yes, definitely, lots.
Only maple, only a grade A from Maine or Vermont. That's the food thing you would really have to look at. When you look at the outdoor events, it's very specific. It has to be in-seat concessions, again, where people aren't going and milling to get food. And so it's, I was at somewhere and it's like I was at an event and I ordered food from my table. It was an outdoor comedy show I went to, and I ordered food to my table, and then the server brought my prepackaged thing to my table. So I think that's the vision of the state. And I think the challenge is with food, we'll have to, if there's breakfast types events that I think might have been traditionally held on the school campus using a gym or something, that's something we would have to take a look at, because the reason restaurants are allowed to operate is because they're following, and this might be the guidance that we give as I'm talking it through, that if you have a breakfast event, you would have to follow the site-specific safety plans that is required by our restaurateurs when they open a restaurant, which probably would be more than what you would have done in the past, where there's been common sense and cleanup. You would have to make sure that you're implementing that same guidance to the same level, because those, especially, I wouldn't recommend any indoor dining. Those are transmission events, even though we are moving towards indoor dining. And if you do have a dining event and you're all ready to follow all the restaurant guidance for doing that, just remember there's different percentages that are allowed for indoor dining. They're much smaller because of the nature of eating and projection of COVID bugs. So.
Okay, any other questions?
Yes, I do have one.
Yes, hi Jennifer.
I just want to make sure I'm right when I understand about permanent venue. Even if we have a very large parking lot, and we usually, like what we did last year, a drive-through, and we have a stage, but obviously it's not permanent because we use a parking lot for parking. So we won't be allowed to do that.
That would be one I would have to take back and talk with Dr. Willis around, because that would be outside of, that would be not a permanent event in my model. But again, we want to be flexible and
Uh-huh.
one where we just review your plan.
Mhm.
Because I don't want to just say no. So that
Okay.
that would be one. Let's talk offline and see how many people. There might be a small percentage of folks on this call that are thinking of non-permanent events, and maybe we just, if you just, we can gather the locations that we're considering, then we can put that into the guidance document that we develop. So we would say, if using a parking lot, which parking lots, it's not a venue per se, but it's
Mhm.
it's a controlled space. We'll strive to be open-minded, knowing what you're trying to achieve.
Okay.
And we're using it for drive-through vaccinations, Lisa.
There you go.
Come on, you gotta give us something here.
Yeah, we're
Well-
gonna try and be as open-minded. And again, just giving you guidance if you're considering that, because again, when you lose one parking lot, then people have to move. There's just other considerations that we would want to provide guidance to. So if you have those alternate sites, share it with maybe Mary Jane's office. So when we have that sub-working group and develop the guidance, we can make sure we can consider it, and then just provide guidance if those type of facilities are going to be used.
So
Okay.
Lisa, what if we do this? Everybody on this call is gonna submit questions, just every question you can come up with. We end up figuring out sort of what all the questions are so that we can have, this is a conversation, just so you know, that is mission critical for these leaders. People want to know what's happening. They want to know when it's happening and why aren't you taking care of it? It's like a huge pressure cooker in so many ways. And I think as soon as we don't want to get too many answers too early to lose flexibility. On the other hand, if there are some of these parameters that we can actually say, okay, this is what that means for that field, et cetera, and sort of push on it a little bit to be able to help both students, parents, and these leaders get to something. And I think we would really, just in terms of timing, just for you to know, we would want to be really clear, like April, right as soon as we get back from the break, mid-April, to be clear on that. Does that work for you guys in terms of timing? Something like that, mid-April instead of waiting till May, and then we'll just get some people that'll get together to talk about what the options are that we want to consider, because people are different in terms of what they're looking at. But, for example, does it really have to be 6-foot distancing? How
Right.
long did?
Yeah, no, I think we're very open to in that environment, in an outdoor environment. At this point, we would probably say 4 feet. We have been, I'm not allowed to advocate as a government official, but we've been sharing research with the state around the 3 feet distancing. So again, in an outdoor environment with students wearing face coverings, 3 feet distancing at an event like this could be possible if the state approves. We would go with the 4 feet distancing. For the adult, that's a really good question. For the adults, I don't know. That's something for us to talk about. It's
Okay, Lisa, does mid-April sound like an appropriate time we could, because whatever the parameters are, then they know what they're working with and where their flexibility lies. So some of it
ideally right after spring break. I mean, our only rate limiting step, we can work, you submit the questions this week, next week we can get to work on drafting that guidance document.
Okay.
And then wait, hopefully next week the state gives us something with the possibility we finalize a final draft ready for your review while you're on spring break, and I'll be on spring break too. And then have it ready for right after we get back from spring break, a meeting like this to review. And hopefully it would just be that kind of final that we're all on the same page, ready to go. And you've had all your questions answered to support your teams. And we know this is also a school community event. I got another good goosebumps, just parents coming together. We know that parents are part of these events planning. And students themselves. So I think, again, we want to make sure that they come off a spring break. Hopefully they had a safe spring break and aren't going to be bringing any bugs back and get off into planning mode. So it's something to look forward to.
Okay. Okay, so before, Lisa, I'm going to jump to a different topic. So can I just say, this is what we just decided. We're going to set another call like this after the spring break. So that will be after April 12th. So we know what that is, that we will ask everyone to submit their questions. We'll call it at the rapid response. Everybody knows that email, sent them there. So we'll collect all the questions. When you submit your questions, please, if any of you are willing to work in a small group, and we'll be looking for diverse, like big school, little school, to try to have a smaller group, like work on some of this directly with public health during this phase. That will be a help to us. And then our goal will be after the next call, maybe, that we're gonna be able to say, here's the guidance. Does that sound good, Lisa? Because I think once they know what the rules are, and as you say, they, last year, people were able to put something together, but I think sooner than later will be great. Anybody have anything else they want to add to that part? Okay, good. Lisa, how do you feel about quickly going over the transportation guidance, since this affects these guys in a variety?
Yeah, I'm excited.
Okay,
I'm excited about our transportation.
so you'll be so just for you guys to know, you're the first people to see this guidance. It's not yet been issued. There'll be a meeting around it next week. And so just a reminder, this was first issued on August 14th originally, and there are some areas that are going to be shifted, and these are now final. These are like finalized on the next week. We'll be going over these for people to begin to get their questions, but the yellow highlighted is what tells you what pieces have been changed. And you're going to note now that some of these things you're going to go, well, wait a second, how does that affect not just transportation, but school? So Lisa, can you start with, and reminder everybody, it's guidance. It's guidance.
And you can always be more strict than us.
More strict, right, more strict than the guidance. I.e., we haven't had to take temperatures since the beginning, and many schools do take temperatures, and staff and families feel better because we do. Okay, Lisa, let's start with number one.
So number one is, in addition to not requiring temperature checks, you're not required to do daily symptom checks of students. I know that most people and most schools are still doing this. There's no science behind it, but I know for many school staff, it's reassuring that this is a step, but you're no longer in any way required to conduct symptom screening on a daily basis. But and again, we consistently educate parents around just excluding children from school if they develop any symptoms or if they've had any close contact. Number two is where you see the first introduction of 3 feet. The state has not issued transportation guidance, so we were able to introduce 3 feet into this transportation. We just conceive of how students are queuing up at different bus stops. 3 feet makes a lot more sense than students being 6 feet apart, especially since most of that activity is outdoors. And then this is also where you see for the first time language introduced discerning between fully immunized or fully vaccinated adults and not fully vaccinated adults. If you look at, and just to recall, the CDC guidance is fully vaccinated adults can gather now without physical distancing. It actually says without any prevention measures. Cal OSHA is lagging. So there's no change yet in Cal OSHA on how it treats fully immunized adults in both exposure and workplace recommendations yet. We reached out to Cal OSHA and don't anticipate anything until late next month at the earliest, but that's Cal OSHA.
Okay.
I'll refrain from further commentary.
Right. So then, Lisa, this involves bench seating charts, how you want people to load the buses.
So this goes, again, this is 2/3 capacity. So that same 67% that you saw is now allowable on buses. We're also allowing 2 students per bench seat. And that ideally, when you're having students seated, it is students of the same family would sit on the same bench. So a brother and sister would sit together. And then for non-sibling, non-household members, they would seat from back to front, 1 child per seat. And then as you hit the capacity of 1 child per seat as you hit the next bus stop. That's first, the second, when they would load from the back to the front again. So the vision is, it's very possible that's not all seats would be filled, but there will be seats that are, have 2 non-household members together. They're all wearing their face masks. But we also we need to know where they are seated. Again, because they potentially could be defined as a close contact, depending on how long the ride is. If someone is infected with COVID-19, if we identify a case during among a student who uses transportation.
Mhm.
So again, this is a goal of both maximizing the bus to a safest possible, to a safer level, so not full capacity, and having those assigned seats so we know who's sitting where. We know that adds a complexity, but that's what is going to allow us to have this fuller capacity, and then just how students are being loaded. So it has as minimal time as possible that there's 2 students per seat. The next line, especially go ahead.
Lisa, before, are you going to talk about the seating, the chart, checking out the charts? So-
You could probably describe that
All
better.
right, so just as an example, one of the issues was who's going to know where children, if you're going to go through all those steps, who's going to know where people were seated? And so, what the plan is that as a bus, and this is really the description of the big bus, right? The giant bus with a lot of students on it that's moving, through a community, stopping at different stops, etc. But when they get to the school, that someone is actually looking at who was sitting where, right? And when they leave the school, someone is looking at who is sitting where. So the concept of seating charts is going to be introduced in a couple of ways, not just in the buses, but also at your school sites, in your classrooms as we get to no longer aligning by 6 feet, but just know that that will be an important piece. And the reason for it, just like why all this, the why is that if there was an exposure, that there would be able to be a way to track and trace. And I think you're all well aware, out of 1.4 million student days, in our schools, we've only still holding at 11 suspected in-school transmission. So it's not as though we expect a lot to happen, given all the other parameters that are being followed, but we want to make sure that we're able to have data if we need to.
And I appreciate that this requires more work and it's a conservative approach. But again, this is where Marin County really is leading the state, even though there's in moving towards full in-person instruction. So this is a place where, just because of the nature of public transportation in research, seeing as having a higher risk for transmission. At this point, we're having this very conservative approach. This might be something when we hit yellow and we see different data from our community around transmission. Probably the first thing we would loosen up is the assigned seat, that requirement for knowing exactly where students are seated, because we know that's a time burden for school staff. But in interim, I'm sure there's brighter brains than me that probably just the child assigned that's the seat that they're on every day, and either they're on that seat, and all we need to know is if they were on that seat or not during their infectious period, if they were a case. So we're happy, our team's happy to work with you if you have any questions around how to do that, but I'm sure that this is something that you guys can. There would be competition if I always wanted to sit in the back of the bus. I won't tell you the other part of that story, but
Yeah. Hey, Lisa, oh dear, please don't. Lisa, what about the issue of, so I'm going to be a carpool. My kids are going to go on a field trip, appropriate field trip, whatever, and students are going in a carpool. So I'm gathering that we just need to know who the students are in the car.
yeah, and I think this will be a lag for us with field trips. Before I was part of those groups where we put as many people in, as many seats. That's not going to be the field trips of our future, at least. So and this again all might change when we're in green, or when we have a case rate less than 1. That's might be when everyone feels a lot that we can return to field trips with kids wearing face coverings. And again, just remember that your world is going to continue to be different because you're going to have a non-immunized population. Even though we've shown our success of not having schools are not reservoirs for community transmission. That's critical. And we may again be able to relax this guidance as we move towards green.
So Lisa, just to add to that, so right now people are already, for students that are in a carpool when they get to school, let's just say that that's one of the things that schools are aware of in the event that they do have an exposure and they have to trace. They actually go back to how did they get to school, who were the other students in the car, and so on.
And that's just one of our risks, like when we've seen with sporting related events, it's the carpool group, especially over the winter when people were carpooling, when we had higher rates and windows up. Again, so windows down is the best thing. COVID hates fresh air. So this is now, it's not necessary any longer for there to be a seat between the driver and that first seat. Especially the driver should be immunized. The drivers are immunized as school staff, and now they're also qualified in transportation. So, but if it's feasible, it's great. Have the space between the driver and the first row of students. If it's not feasible, it's all okay. Again, this is just the introduction of face coverings. Everyone should be wearing face coverings, and I mean, TK through 2, there shouldn't be issues with most students and face coverings throughout their transportation. But we appreciate there's one bus driver. They don't need to be scanning for face coverings all the time. Just get to school safely.
Okay, Lisa, I think that's it. And so if you all think about, be thinking about this, and next week we'll go over it again. Lisa, somebody texted me because they didn't want to ask this question out loud. But it is, what about the prom? Do you want a prom? The kids want a prom. You've sort of given a hard no. What if it's outside? What if it's in a circle pod? I mean, your thoughts?
My thoughts are no. I hear you, and I'll go and consider with Dr. Willis. We're allowing Easter egg hunts this year. Prom is just so close. It's eating, it's dancing, it's, at least my prom, there's a lot of physical close contact. Unless they've become more conservative since 1991, I don't think that's the case.
So the thing will be, I think, from the standpoint, we don't want Redwood to say yes to a prom and Novato High to say no to a prom and Terra Linda to say sort of a prom. So I feel like it's one of those things, Lisa, that it will be easier just in the big story. I have some colleagues that have said to me, can you please get proms canceled forever? They don't want any proms. It's a problem. The kids, and I heard one of your public health colleagues.
You've been talking to David Sondheim.
No, it wasn't even David.
Careful.
But seriously, cancel the proms. We do not want proms. There's too many issues that come up. So I think let's just do that, Lisa. Mary Jane Burke, cancel proms.
It's a rite of passage. You go to the Jersey Shore, you get a shore house.
Oh, get out of here. Well, I have to say, last week at the vaccination pod, there was a student there with his mom, long story, and the one thing he looked at me right with his mask, is there going to be a prom? Tell me there's going to be a prom. And I just said, no, there's not going to be a prom.
I just can't see, I can see there being another event. I just can't see a prom. Like it's just close contact. And that's, to me, as much as this feels like a very controlled reservoir with a graduation event, unless someone thinks outside the box in a way that I am conceiving a prom in a very different way, then I can't see how proms would be allowable. I'll have again, if someone is seeing something differently, share it with MCOE and we'll.
Lisa, let's just see if we can get closure. Is there anybody on this call that feels like we should have, given what we just heard from public health, right? It sounds like, I think we can make a hard no, there will not be a prom. There will not be proms this year. We don't want students in close proximity, dancing, etc. right? That's not what we're looking for. Is there anybody that wants that to be further discussed?
I would personally, I mean, if you're saying that there's outdoor things that are allowed to happen, I don't think that we need to necessarily label it as a prom, but I think if you're allowed to be outside and be apart, why couldn't they have some type of thing that was similar? And yeah, there's no rubbing up against each other and stuff like that, but they could still have an event that's similar but different.
Yeah.
I
but-
think it should be
Stephanie-
up for discussion.
yeah, well, Stephanie, but then that's not a prom. So we could say
Okay.
prom. There is no
Should
prom.
be seated, again, you need to chaperone, ensure that when they're seated and that they're 3 feet apart the entire time they're together. And so the more people you bring together like that, it's
Yeah.
again, if it's a concert, an outdoor concert they attend, that would to me would be an acceptable thing where it's an outdoor concert, they're seated 3 feet apart, they're listening to a band and then they're leaving. But any event that, again, and the food and the drink and all those other things are things that are gonna, and again, my bias is closing out this year super well. So when we reopen in the fall, the community is reassured. Everyone is, our community is on board with supporting the full
Mhm.
return of students in the fall and
Right.
as near normal as possible. So that's our biggest concern.
Okay, so how about this? There's not going to be a prom.
Nope.
However, there might be situations at your schools where you have events. Those events would have to follow all the protocols, but it's not a prom, right? I mean, because I think that is something. So, and
You
you
can have a National Honor Society.
okay,
event.
Lisa,
And
Lisa,
one of,
oh, sorry, Chris, did you have
if I could-
something?
yeah, if I could interrupt, I think one of my concerns isn't like, so we could do a safe prom, right? I mean, I'm sure that Stephanie's a brilliant educational leader and used to work, you are, I know that. And used to working with these kids and can create a structure that we keep it safe. But this is kind of like graduation. It's all of the things that happen around prom. It's getting all the people together for pictures before the event. And then it's the parties that happen after the event. So that's my concern. I'm not concerned about what we can do on campus. I'm concerned about us creating that super spreader event around the small event that we have, which means so much to our kids in our community. But then we blow out the rest of the problems and then it ends up messing up our graduation because we've got these spikes in case rates and then we can't do our traditional graduation. So I think we've got to prioritize what we think is most important and do everything we can to make sure that those things happen, and make sure that we keep our kids on campus for student learning, make sure that we can have this big graduation, which is this culminating event. So I think we want to look at this through that lens, so that we don't do something before that messes up all the other stuff that comes after.
But Chris, can you say a safe prom? So you consider a safe prom, the kids are 6 feet apart?
What I would say is I know that our team could come up with something that would work within the guidance, and we could make that happen. I mean, it wouldn't be a prom.
Yeah,
It
okay.
would be.
Let's just not use the word prom.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But whatever event it is, we need to be careful of all the other satellite events that happen around it, is my point. Whatever we want to call it, I think we need to be more concerned about those satellite events than the actual event.
And I think to your point, Chris, where from a public health perspective, a countywide public health perspective, that having graduation events at 14 plus districts is a lot already. And all the ancillary events, there are going to be gathering. There will be transmission. We saw it happen last year. There will be transmission related to these ancillary events. It's not going to be your event itself, most likely. But we are going to have a peak and have the same story we shared last summer. And so if we can focus just on graduation and not create other injects, as we say in our disaster preparedness world, other injects will just allow us to stay focused. And then again, people will gather, but we can work on just working with Mary Jane students groups and how can we work with students so they take a role in not having those unnecessary gatherings.
Lisa, can I just jump to something? Has our public health stayed at, if I'm going to a sporting event, I'm a student, I'm playing football, I can just have one adult in the crowd, is that right? Or in the
So I think the key word is there's not to be spectators at these events, at least as the state is providing guidance now. It's a chaperone. So an adult is allowed for the sole purpose, this key word, for the sole purpose of age appropriate supervision. And so the example I have, the best example I have is when my kids do soccer, they're all at Davidson. There's lots of different fields. My husband and I would both have to be at the event because my kids are in 2 different age groups. It would be appropriate for both of us to go to Davidson, one of us on one field watching the 8-year-olds and one of us on the other field watching the 10-year-olds. So it really is, and the gray space that many are finding is I wouldn't go with my son if he's 16, provide age appropriate supervision. That's gray space that I see no evil, hear no evil, but it really is for the key word is for the sole purpose of age appropriate supervision. So we see that as one member of the household, unless there's 2 concurring events on the same field at the same time, which I'm sure some of your schools can have 2 students of the same household competing in 2 different events at the same time. And the vision would be one parent or guardian would be at one event providing age appropriate supervision, and one parent or guardian would be at another event. That being said, this is where there's dissonance, I think, because there's professional sports that allow spectators. That's they also have professional money and higher expectations as professional for-profit organizations to create a safest possible atmosphere that school staffing and school budgets don't have the same. I don't have the same supports. So if the state changes, we will adapt to the state. But at this point, it's one parent guardian.
And the state, just so you know, the state did come out with the one, just for you to know. And the issue becomes these schools are playing sports against each other. They do not have the capacity to supervise the adults. So I think it's just important that the message is the same, right, for everybody in terms of the actual events.
And honestly, I don't understate that what's consuming the most time in public health is non-adherence with state guidance for club sports. That's what I've spent probably 10 hours this week myself. And then there's 2 other doctors and 2 other nurses spending more time than me because of activity related to non-adherence and non-compliance. And again, those are the events. We're currently investigating a possible outbreak related to one of those events. It's not confirmed yet, but we're going down in case rates. But those are the activities, and again, those ancillary activities where there is higher risk. And again, it will be an under-vaccinated population of especially that 14 to 18-year-old group. COVID behaves very differently in the under 14-year-olds than it does in the 14 to 18-year-olds. So I know we're the Debbie Downers on this one, but we're so close. We're so close to graduation. That's the goal.
Yeah. Okay, so we know what the next steps are. Any questions, you're going to send a rapid response. If you're willing to be part of a small group, put your name in there. We'll get the information to Dr. Santora, Dr. Willis. We're going to be looking for county-wide guidance on these issues that provide you the sort of the boundaries, if you will, that you can then have the flexibility to work between. Lisa, the prom is usually something that's coming up sooner than later. So I think if we can move that one forward.
No, as of this call, the official word is no prom. Public health does not approve proms in Marin County.
Okay.
So
All right.
You can say, and anyone on the call say we've asked the county to take it under consideration, and we'll take it under consideration. But at this point, the rule is no proms.
Yeah.
Sorry, Mary Jane.
David, no,
I'm
please.
about to walk into an MCAL meeting where I believe most of the understanding is that for athletic events, there can be 2 spectators per athlete. And that sounds like I just heard that's incorrect. Am I correct?
One guardian,
One
supervising
supervisorial.
guardian per athlete.
Okay,
Yeah.
I will share that in 90 seconds. When
And
I
in
go
fact,
over that.
Mike Grant, are you on this call? I think you are somewhere. We have that. Yeah, Mike, can you forward real quick that to David, the information from the state about that? Oh, there we go. Age appropriate. Oh. No.
Yeah.
Is that it?
This is about the one single adult per or immediate family member older than the sport participant.
Yes.
Uh-huh. See
Yeah.
that? And that's the state. So we can't even blame Lisa for that, even though they came out ahead of the state as usual. So can we just forward that document real quick to David so he's got it? Because that could be a shift in what they think. But this
Yeah.
is the state guidance, David.
I got you. And I'll share it with MCAL in a couple minutes.
Good, I'll send it right now.
Can I ask one last question really quick before I go?
Yes, of course.
Lisa, I apologize. I'm always the one who asks this. Am I correct? Guidance has not changed on wind instruments indoors with bell covers. They still need to be outdoors, correct?
Yes,
Thank you.
we're looking into this again, especially with now more events being allowed. We know music is important, and sorry, we are lagging. We apologize.
No.
I
Hey,
apologize
you got a
for-
few things to do, right? Good luck with your daughter. Thank you.
Bus guidance.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, we'll get a Zoom out for the next call in April. You're gonna send in your questions and if you're willing to work with everybody, that'll be great. Thanks, everybody. Happy day.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Bye. Thanks, Lisa.